Hi guys and welcome to Crazy Pepper Revenge. This channel is all about crazy true stories, stuff that happens in real life when things get a little bit messy.
The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers as I heard Julia's laughter drifting through our kitchen window. That wasn't her work laugh. The polite professional chuckle she used with clients at the law firm. This was different, throaty, intimate. I wiped my hands on the old rag hanging from my belt and glanced at my watch. 10:30 on a Tuesday night. Pretty late for a business call, even for someone climbing the corporate ladder like my wife. Tom's such an idiot. Her voice carried clearly through the screen. He actually believes I'm working late again. My stomach dropped. 22 years of marriage, and I'd never heard her talk about me like that to anyone. I crept closer to the window, staying in the shadows cast by our overgrown hedge. Julia sat at our kitchen table, her blonde hair catching the overhead light, phone pressed to her ear, like she was sharing state secrets. The hotel was perfect last week, she continued, twirling a strand of hair around her finger. Room 237 at the lakeside. Tom would never think to look there. Too expensive for his taste. The lakeside. I knew that place. Fancy resort on the north side of town where the real estate developers and city council members held their power lunches. Way out of our budget, or so I'd thought. I can't wait to see you tomorrow, Julia purred. Wear that cologne I like. She ended the call and immediately started typing on her phone, that secretive smile still playing on her lips. The same smile she used to give me when we were dating, back when I was the center of her universe instead of some inconvenient obstacle. I stayed frozen by that window for another 10 minutes, watching her move around our kitchen like she owned the world. She grabbed a yogurt from the fridge, scrolled through her phone, and hummed some tune I didn't recognize. Happy, completely, utterly happy in a way I hadn't seen her in years. When she finally headed upstairs, I waited until I heard the shower running before slipping back inside. Her phone lay on the counter, charging. Julia always forgot to lock the screen, one of her few flaws in an otherwise methodically organized life. The text messages made my hands shake. Can't stop thinking about this afternoon, you drive me crazy. Sent to someone named Nate. Tom's working late again tomorrow. We could meet at your place instead of the hotel. Another message to Nate, sent just an hour ago. I'm done pretending to care about his little real estate deals. This marriage is over in everything but paperwork. This one was from 3 days ago. I scrolled further back, finding weeks of messages. Photos, too. Julia in lingerie I'd never seen before. Julia in what looked like an expensive hotel room. Julia laughing at jokes about me, about our house, about everything I'd built from nothing. The shower was still running upstairs. I grabbed my jacket and car keys, needing air before I did something stupid. The boxing gym was the only place open this late. Marty's Fitness stayed open 24 hours for guys like me who needed to hit something when the world stopped making sense. I found Marty himself behind the counter, reading a paperback thriller and nursing a cup of coffee that smelled like it had been brewing since morning. Tommy, he said, looking up from his book. A little late for a workout, isn't it? Marty was one of the few people who still called me Tommy, a leftover from our high school days when we'd both been scrappy kids from the wrong side of town. He'd gone into police work for 20 years before opening this gym. I'd gone into real estate, clawing my way up from selling foreclosures to actually making decent money helping families find homes. Can't sleep, I said, which was true enough. Woman trouble? Marty had always been direct. I looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. How'd you know? Same look I used to see on domestic calls. Guy finds out his world isn't what he thought it was. He closed his book and leaned forward. What did you find? I told him everything. The phone call, the messages, the photos. Marty listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding like he'd heard it all before. So what are you going to do? He asked when I finished. I don't know, confront her? File for divorce? Key the fool's car? Marty laughed, but not in a mean way. Tommy, you always were too honest for your own good. You want some advice from an old cop? I nodded. Don't do anything stupid. Don't confront anybody while you're angry. And definitely don't key anybody's car where there might be cameras. He paused, studying my face. But if you're smart about it, there are ways to make people face consequences for their choices. What do you mean? I mean, you've got to hit them where it hurts. Not physically, he added quickly, seeing my expression. But reputation, money, pride, that's where real damage happens. That's how you win. I left the gym with Marty's words echoing in my head. The drive home took me past the Lakeside Hotel, its elegant facade lit up against the night sky. I pulled into the parking lot and sat there for a while, staring at those glowing windows and wondering which room had been theirs. A black BMW sat in the corner of the lot, license plate reading Nate 1. Vanity plates. Of course, I didn't key his car. I'm not that stupid. But I did write a note on the back of a gas station receipt and slip it under his windshield wiper. I hope you're worth it. The next morning, Julia was already gone when I woke up. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter about an early meeting, but I knew better now. I made coffee and sat at the same table where she'd been planning her betrayal, trying to figure out my next move. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Geller, our neighbor. She was 70-something and had made gossip her full-time occupation since retiring from the post office. Tom, dear, I saw you out late last night. Everything all right? Also, there was a woman taking pictures of your house this morning around 6. Thought you should know. Pictures of our house? I texted back asking for details, but Mrs. Geller was better with a telephone than with typing. She called immediately. Oh, Tom, it was the strangest thing. This blonde woman, not Julia, someone else, was standing across the street with her phone out, taking pictures of your front door and your car. When she saw me watching, she got in this little red car and drove off real quick. Did you get a look at the license plate? Heavens no, these old eyes aren't what they used to be. But she looked familiar. Maybe someone from Julia's work? I thanked Mrs. Geller and hung up, my mind racing. Someone was watching us. Watching me. The note I'd left on Nate's car had apparently stirred up more than I'd expected. My phone rang again. This time it was Julia. Tom, we need to talk when I get home tonight. Her voice was cold, professional. The same tone she used with difficult clients. About what? I think you know. The line went quiet, leaving me alone in our kitchen with the growing realization that whatever game we'd been playing, the rules had just changed. Julia came home that evening with the kind of controlled fury I'd only seen her use in court. She set her briefcase down with deliberate precision and turned to face me across our living room like we were opposing counsel. Did you leave a note on someone's car last night? She asked. No point in lying. Yes. Are you out of your mind? Her voice rose just slightly, the only crack in her professional composure. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Embarrassing for who? You or your boyfriend? The word hung in the air between us. Julia's face went through several expressions, surprise, anger, calculation, before settling on something that looked almost like relief. So you know, she said simply. I know you've been lying to me for months. I know about the Lakeside Hotel. I know about Nate. I kept my voice level, remembering Marty's advice about not confronting people while angry. What I don't know is why you're making me out to be the villain here. Julia sat down on our couch, smoothing her skirt with practiced movements. Because you are, Tom. You've been the villain in this marriage for years. By working 60-hour weeks to pay for this house, by supporting your career when you were starting out, by being small, she interrupted. By being satisfied with small deals and small dreams and this small life. She gestured around our living room, taking in the furniture we'd bought piece by piece over 2 decades, the family photos on the mantel, the bookshelf I'd built myself. I outgrew this years ago. Then why didn't you just leave? Because I was trying to be kind, trying to let you down easy. She looked at me with something that might have been pity, but then you had to go and make it ugly. I stared at this woman I'd been married to for over 20 years, searching for any trace of the person I'd fallen in love with. One note on a car is making it ugly? What do you call months of sneaking around behind my back? I call it moving on with my life. That night, I lay in our guest bedroom. Julia had claimed the master suite with the same casual authority she used to claim everything else, and planned my next move. She wanted ugly? I could do ugly. The next morning, I drove to Nate's real estate office. Davidson Development was spelled out in gold letters across the front window of a sleek downtown building. Through the glass, I could see him at his desk, talking on the phone and gesturing with his free hand like he was conducting an orchestra. I didn't go inside. Instead, I sat in my truck across the street and watched him work. Nate Davidson was everything I wasn't. Tall, polished, with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having to worry about money. His BMW was parked in a reserved spot right in front, detailed to showroom perfection. I pulled out my phone and did some research. Nate's company specialized in high-end commercial developments. shopping centers, office complexes, the kind of projects that required city approval and environmental permits and a dozen other bureaucratic hoops. The kind of projects that could be delayed or derailed by the right person asking the right questions. I'd learned a few things in 20 years of real estate. I knew which city council members owed favors and which ones held grudges. I knew which environmental groups had lawyers hungry for a cause. I knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. More importantly, I knew that guys like Nate Davidson usually had skeletons in their closets. Successful developers didn't get that way by following every rule and regulation to the letter. My phone buzzed with a text from our daughter, Ella. She was a sophomore at State, majoring in journalism and minoring in having opinions about everything. Mom says you're going through a midlife crisis. Are you okay? I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Your mom and I are having some problems, but I'm fine. How are classes? Sucks that you guys are fighting, but honestly, I'm not surprised. You two haven't seemed happy in forever. Out of the mouths of babes. Ella had always been perceptive, even as a kid. If she'd noticed the cracks in our marriage, they must have been pretty obvious. Can I ask you something? I typed. When did you first notice we weren't happy? Probably around my junior year of high school. You guys stopped talking to each other, just talked at each other. And Mom started dressing different, caring more about what other people thought. A pause, then another message. Also, she started talking about you like you were this burden she had to carry. I hated that. I felt something loosen in my chest. At least one person in my family was still on my side. That afternoon, I made some phone calls. First to Jerry Kowalski, who sat on the City Planning Commission and owed me a favor from when I'd helped his son find an apartment. Then to Maria Santos, an environmental lawyer who'd been looking for a test case to challenge some of the more questionable development practices in our area. By evening, I had a plan. The next few days passed quietly. Julia and I moved around each other like polite strangers, maintaining the fiction of normalcy for the benefit of neighbors and coworkers. She was probably planning her exit strategy. I was planning something else entirely. On Friday, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Maria Santos, the environmental lawyer. Tom, you were right about Davidson Development. They've been cutting corners on environmental impact studies for years. We found at least 3 projects where they submitted incomplete or misleading reports. Is that enough to stop their current projects? It's enough to tie them up in court for months, maybe years. And if we can prove a pattern of deliberate deception, she paused. Let's just say Mr. Davidson is going to be very busy with lawyers for the foreseeable future. What do you need from me? Just keep your ears open. If you hear anything about Davidson Development that doesn't sound right, give me a call. I hung up feeling better than I had in weeks. Julia wanted to move on with her life? Fine, but she was going to discover that her new boyfriend came with some very expensive baggage. That evening, Julia announced she was going out with friends from work. Don't wait up, said, not meeting my eyes. I waited until her car disappeared around the corner, then drove to the Lakeside Hotel. Sure enough, Nate's BMW was in the parking lot. I didn't leave another note this time. Instead, I called the hotel's front desk. Hi, this is Nate Davidson in room 237. I'm expecting a delivery, but I wanted to make sure you have the right contact information on file. I made my voice sound hurried, distracted. Of course, Mr. Davidson. Let me pull up your reservation. A pause. I show you're registered through Sunday, and we have your cell phone number ending in 4782. Is that correct? Perfect, thanks. I hung up and smiled. Room 237, just like Julie had mentioned. And now I had Nate's cell number. I drove home and spent the evening researching everything I could find about Davidson Development's business practices. By the time Julia came home, smelling like expensive cologne and looking thoroughly satisfied with herself, I had enough information to keep Maria Santos busy for months. Good evening? I asked pleasantly. Fine, she said, not bothering to elaborate on her obvious lie. That's nice. I had a productive evening too. Something in my tone made her look at me more carefully. Doing what? Research. You know how I like to stay informed about local business developments. I saw the flicker of uncertainty cross her face before she turned away. I'm going to bed. Sweet dreams, I called after her. The game was definitely changing now. Monday morning brought the first real satisfaction I'd felt in months. I was sitting in my lawyer's office by 8 a.m., watching Steve Brennan review the documents I'd compiled over the weekend. This is thorough work, Tom, Steve said, adjusting his reading glasses. Bank statements, credit card records, phone bills, you've been busy. I wanted to be prepared. Steve had handled real estate transactions for me over the years, but he also did divorce work. More importantly, he was discreet and had no love for the kind of lawyers Julia worked with downtown. The evidence of the affair is pretty clear, he continued. Hotel receipts, text messages, photographs. But what's interesting is this financial stuff. He tapped a stack of papers. Your wife's been moving money around. Small amounts, but consistent, almost like she's been planning this for a while. Planning what? An exit strategy. Look here. She's been transferring money from your joint accounts into a personal account you're not on. Nothing illegal, technically, but it shows intent. Steve leaned back in his chair. The question is, how aggressive do you want to be? I thought about Julia's words from the other night, about being small, about her moving on with her life while treating me like an inconvenience. Very aggressive. All right then, we file today. I'll request an immediate freeze on all joint assets pending the divorce proceedings. We'll also request temporary spousal support for you, not her, based on the disparity in your current incomes and her recent financial behavior. She makes more than I do. Exactly. And she's been using marital assets to fund an extramarital affair. A judge isn't going to look kindly on that. Steve grinned. Plus, we'll make sure her employer knows about the situation. Most law firms have pretty strict policies about personal conduct that reflects poorly on the firm. 2 hours later, I walked out of Steve's office feeling like I just fired the opening shot in a war I intended to win. The next call was to Jerry Kowalski at the Planning Commission. Jerry, it's Tom Mitchell. Remember that favor you owed me? Sure, Tom, what do you need? I need you to take a very close look at Davidson Development's current projects, specifically their environmental compliance. Any particular reason? Let's just say I have concerns about their business practices. Jerry was quiet for a moment. This wouldn't have anything to do with the rumors about Nate Davidson and your wife, would it? Small-town gossip traveled fast. It might. Fair enough, I'll make some calls. By Wednesday, things started happening fast. Julia came home that evening looking like she'd been hit by a truck. The bank froze our accounts, she said without preamble. I know, my lawyer told me they'd notify you today. Your lawyer? Her voice went up an octave. You filed for divorce without telling me? The same way you started an affair without telling me. Funny how that works. Julia sat down heavily on our couch, her professional composure finally cracking. Tom, we can work this out. We don't need lawyers and courts and all this drama. You're right, we could have worked it out. 6 months ago, when you first started lying to me? Or 3 months ago, when you started stealing from our joint accounts to pay for hotel rooms with your boyfriend? I kept my voice calm, reasonable. But you chose drama, Julia. I'm just playing the game you started. I never stole anything. I pulled out copies of the bank statements Steve had prepared. February 14th, $200 cash withdrawal, same day as a charge to the Lakeside Hotel. March 3rd, $300 transfer to your personal account, same day Nate Davidson bought you that bracelet you claimed was a bonus from work. I looked up at her. Should I keep going? Her face had gone pale. You've been spying on me. I've been paying attention, something I should have done months ago. Thursday brought even better news. Maria Santos called me at work, barely able to contain her excitement. Tom, we hit the jackpot. Davidson Development has been falsifying environmental reports for years. We're talking about potential groundwater contamination, illegal dumping, the whole 9 yards. Enough for criminal charges? Probably not criminal, but definitely enough for massive civil penalties. And here's the beautiful part. 3 of their current projects are going to be shut down pending a full environmental review. That's millions of dollars in delays and potential fines. I thought about Nate Davidson's smug confidence, his gold license plates, his casual assumption that he could take whatever he wanted. How long before this becomes public? The city's announcing the investigation tomorrow. Should make for interesting reading in the business section. That evening, Julia didn't come home at all. She texted around 9 p.m. to say she was staying at a friend's place. I knew which friend. Friday's newspaper was everything I'd hoped for. City launches investigation into major developer, ran across the front page of the business section, with a photo of Nate Davidson looking surprised and angry outside his office building. The article detailed years of questionable practices, millions in potential fines, and the immediate suspension of 3 major projects. Davidson Development's stock price, they'd gone public 2 years ago, dropped 20% in the first hour of trading. My phone rang around noon. Well, it was Julia. This is your doing, she said without preamble. And what's my doing? Don't play stupid, the investigation, the newspaper article, all of it. Julia, I sell houses. I don't investigate environmental crimes. Which was technically true. I just pointed the right people in the right direction. Nate says you've been asking questions, making calls. Nate's probably got bigger problems to worry about than what I've been doing. She was quiet for a long moment. What do you want, Tom? I want a fair divorce settlement. I want our daughter to know the truth about why our marriage ended. And I want you to stop pretending I'm the bad guy here. And if I agree to that, then maybe the environmental investigation is the end of your boyfriend's problems instead of the beginning. Another long pause. I need time to think. Take all the time you need. Just remember that every day this drags out, more people are going to be asking questions about Davidson Development and about the lawyer who was sleeping with the owner while he was breaking environmental laws. I hung up feeling better than I had in months. Julia wanted to play hardball. I'd been playing hardball since she was still in law school. The weekend passed quietly. Julia stayed wherever she was staying. I worked in my garden, fixed the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, and caught up on paperwork. Normal, peaceful activities that felt revolutionary after months of walking on eggshells. Sunday evening, Ella called. Dad, Mom says you're being unreasonable about the divorce. What did she tell you? That you're trying to destroy her career and her relationship out of spite. I took a deep breath. Ella, your mother has been having an affair for months. She's been lying to both of us and stealing money from our joint accounts to fund it. The divorce didn't happen because I'm spiteful. It happened because she chose someone else. Silence on the other end of the line. Ella? I'm here. I guess I knew something was wrong, but I didn't think it was that bad. It is that bad, but I'm not trying to destroy her career. I'm just trying to protect myself and make sure she faces some consequences for her choices. What about her boyfriend? Mom says you're trying to ruin his business. Her boyfriend has been breaking environmental laws for years. I didn't make him do that. I just made sure the right people found out about it. Another pause. Dad? Yeah? I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet house and realized that for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Not the small, insignificant person Julia had tried to make me into, but the guy who'd built a business from nothing and raised a daughter and earned the respect of his community through 20 years of honest work. Julia had wanted me to be small. Instead, she'd reminded me how to be big. Monday morning brought a phone call that changed everything. It was Becca Morrison, Julia's best friend since law school and the person I'd assumed was covering for the affair. Tom, we need to talk. If this is about Julia, you should probably call her lawyer. It's not about Julia, it's about me. Something in her voice made me pay attention. Becca had always been the perfect friend, supportive, loyal, always ready with advice or a shoulder to cry on. She was also married to a successful accountant and lived in one of the better neighborhoods across town. What about you? Can we meet somewhere private? This isn't a conversation for the phone. An hour later, I sat across from Becca in a coffee shop downtown, watching her fidget with her wedding ring and avoid eye contact. I need to tell you something, she said finally, about Julia and Nate, about how it all started. I'm listening. It was my idea. I stared at her. What was your idea? The affair, setting them up, all of it. She looked up at me then, and I saw something I'd never noticed before, a hard edge behind her usually warm brown eyes. I introduced them at that charity gala last year. I made sure they sat together. I even suggested the Lakeside Hotel when Julia was worried about being seen somewhere local. Why? Because I wanted to destroy your marriage. The words hung between us like a confession at a homicide trial. I felt something shift in my chest, a realignment of everything I thought I knew about the past year. Why would you want to destroy my marriage? Becca's laugh was bitter. You really don't remember, do you? Remember what? 5 years ago, the Morrison account. It came back to me then, a business deal I'd barely thought about since it happened. Becca's husband had asked me to help them buy a commercial property for his accounting practice. I'd done the research and discovered that Becca had been skimming money from her own clients to make the down payment. I'd refused to handle the transaction and advised her husband to get a forensic accountant. The resulting investigation had nearly destroyed their marriage and definitely destroyed Becca's career. She'd avoided criminal charges, but only barely. You cost me everything, she continued. My career, my reputation, my marriage almost ended. Do you know what it's like to have your husband look at you like you're a stranger? You were stealing from your clients. I was borrowing. I would have paid it back. With what money? She waved that away like it was irrelevant. The point is, you could have minded your own business. You could have just done the deal and kept your mouth shut. But you had to be the hero, didn't you? You had to be the honest one. I thought about all the times over the past year when Becca had been at our house, offering Julia advice about our marriage, encouraging her to follow her heart, and not settle for less than she deserved. So you decided to get revenge by destroying my marriage. I decided to show you what it felt like to lose everything. She leaned forward, and for a moment I saw the real person behind the helpful friend mask. Julia was so easy to manipulate. She was already unhappy, already feeling like she'd outgrown you. All I had to do was introduce her to someone who made her feel important and sophisticated. And Nate? Was he part of this? Nate doesn't know anything. He just thinks he swept a beautiful married woman off her feet. Becca smiled, and it wasn't a nice expression. Men are so predictable that way. I sat back in my chair, processing this revelation. Why are you telling me this now? Because it's not working out the way I planned. Her composure cracked slightly. Julia was supposed to leave you quietly, take half your assets, and disappear into her new life. Instead, you fought back. And now everything's falling apart. Everything? The environmental investigation is real, Tom. Nate really has been cutting corners, and now he's facing millions in fines. His business is collapsing, and Julia's law firm is talking about letting her go because of the scandal. Becca's voice rose slightly. This was supposed to hurt you, not destroy everyone. So you want me to what? Call off the dogs? Make it all go away? I want you to stop. You've made your point. I studied her face, seeing the desperation she was trying to hide. What aren't you telling me, Becca? She was quiet for a long moment. Nate's been asking questions about how the city found out about his environmental problems. He's not stupid, and he's starting to put pieces together. And if he figures out that I set him up with Julia specifically to hurt you, he's going to realize that someone with access to inside information has been feeding details to his enemies. She met my eyes. Someone like the woman who's been sleeping with him for the past 3 months. The final piece clicked into place. You've been having an affair with Nate, too. Julia doesn't know. She thinks she's his only side piece. But Nate's been playing both of us. Becca's laugh was hollow. Turns out I'm just as stupid as she is. I felt a moment of something that might have been sympathy, but it passed quickly. So now you're worried that when Nate's business collapses, he's going to take you and Julia down with him. I'm worried that my husband is going to find out I've been cheating on him with the same man who's destroying Julia's marriage. Richard already barely trusts me after the embezzlement thing. If he finds out about this... She trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. You'll lose everything, again. Please, Tom. I know I hurt you, but this has gone far enough. I looked at this woman who had systematically destroyed my marriage out of spite and revenge, who had manipulated my wife and her lover like pieces on a chessboard, and who was now begging me to save her from the consequences of her own actions. You're right, I said finally. This has gone far enough. Relief flooded her face. Thank you. I knew you'd understand. I understand perfectly. I stood up, leaving money on the table for my coffee. I understand that you're a manipulative, vindictive person who destroyed my family for revenge. I understand that you've been lying and scheming for over a year, and I understand that you're about to face the consequences of all those choices. Tom, please, here's what's going to happen, Becca. You're going to go home and tell your husband everything about the affair, about manipulating Julia, about setting up Nate, everything. I can't do that. Then I will, along with telling Julia exactly how her best friend has been playing her, and telling Nate how his girlfriend has been feeding information to his enemies. I leaned down so we were at eye level. Your choice. I left her sitting in that coffee shop, finally understanding what it felt like to be on the receiving end of consequences. That evening, I called Maria Santos. Maria, I've got some new information about Davidson Development that you're going to find very interesting. By the time I finished explaining Becca's confession and her role in feeding inside information about Nate's business practices, Maria was practically purring with satisfaction. This is perfect, Tom. If we can prove that Davidson was sharing confidential business information with unauthorized third parties, we can add corporate espionage to the list of charges. What does that mean? It means Nate Davidson isn't just facing environmental fines anymore. He's looking at potential criminal charges and the complete destruction of his business. I hung up feeling like I'd just lit the final fuse on a very large firework. The explosion was going to be spectacular. The abandoned Eastgate Mall had been closed for 3 years, a sufferer of changing shopping habits and economic downturn. But it still had power in some sections, and more importantly, it had the kind of acoustic properties that would make voices carry throughout the empty corridors. I'd chosen it carefully for what I hoped would be the final act of this drama. The text messages I'd sent were simple. Meet me at Eastgate Mall, main entrance, 8 p.m. Time to settle this once and for all. I'd sent identical messages to Julia, Nate, and Becca, with one small addition to each, a piece of information that would guarantee they'd show up. To Julia, I have recordings of Becca's confession. To Nate, I know about the environmental cover-up and who's been feeding information to your enemies. To Becca, your husband knows everything. This is your chance to explain before I do. By 7:30, I was positioned in the old radio shack, with a clear view of the main entrance and access to the mall's ancient PA system that somehow still worked. The security cameras had been disconnected years ago, but the basic infrastructure remained. Julia arrived first, looking nervous and overdressed for an abandoned mall in her business suit and heels. She stood near the entrance, checking her phone and glancing around like she expected an ambush. Nate showed up 5 minutes later in his BM, parking as close to the entrance as possible. Even in crisis, the man cared about his car. He spotted Julia immediately and walked over, their conversation too quiet for me to hear from my position. Becca was last, driving her husband's sedan instead of her usual car. She approached the other two cautiously, and I could see the tension ratchet up immediately. Whatever conversation they were having, it wasn't friendly. Time for the main event. I keyed the PA system, and my voice echoed through the empty mall corridors. Welcome to the Eastgate Mall, where everything must go. All three of them froze, looking around for the source of the voice. Tom, Julia called out, where are you? I'm everywhere and nowhere, Julia. Kind of like your honesty for the past year. This is ridiculous, Nate said loudly. Come out here and talk like an adult. Adults tell the truth, Nate. Adults don't falsify environmental reports or sleep with other men's wives. I paused for effect. Adults definitely don't get manipulated by vindictive women with revenge fantasies. I saw Becca flinch at that last part. What's he talking about? Nate demanded, turning to face the two women. Tom, please. Becca's voice carried clearly in the empty space. Don't do this. Do what, Becca? Tell the truth? Isn't that what started this whole mess? Me telling the truth about your embezzlement 5 years ago? Julia's head snapped toward her best friend. What embezzlement? Oh, she didn't tell you that part? I continued through the PA system. Your best friend, your confidant, your advisor, and all things romantic. She's been playing you like a violin for over a year. Everything that's happened, everything you think you chose, was actually Becca's revenge plot against me. That's not true, Becca said, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Tell them about the charity gala, Becca. Tell them how you specifically arranged for Julia to sit next to Nate. Tell them about suggesting the Lakeside Hotel. Tell them about encouraging Julia to follow her heart and not settle for less. I could see the realization dawning on Julia's face, the way pieces were clicking into place. You set me up, she said to Becca. I helped you find happiness, Becca replied, but she was backing away from both of them now. You used me to get revenge on my husband. Ladies, Nate interrupted. Can we focus on the real problem here? This lunatic has destroyed my business with false accusations and industrial sabotage. False accusations? I laughed, the sound echoing off the empty storefronts. Nate, my friend, there's nothing false about those environmental reports you've been fudging for years. There's nothing false about the groundwater contamination at the Riverside project. And there's definitely nothing false about the criminal charges that are being filed tomorrow morning. Criminal charges? His voice cracked slightly. Oh yes, corporate espionage, environmental fraud, conspiracy. The district attorney is very interested in your business practices. I paused. They're also very interested in how confidential information about your projects ended up in the hands of environmental groups. Nate turned to stare at Becca. You. She's been sleeping with you too, Nate, I continued helpfully. While you were sleeping with my wife, you were also sleeping with her best friend, and she's been feeding information about your business to anyone who would listen. all as part of her elaborate revenge scheme against me. The silence that followed was beautiful. Is that true? Julia asked Becca. Is what true? Nate demanded. The sleeping together part or the industrial espionage part? Both, I answered for her. Becca's been playing all of us. She wanted to destroy my marriage, so she manipulated you into an affair, Julia. She wanted to hurt me financially, so she fed information about Nate's illegal activities to environmental groups. And she wanted to feel powerful again after I exposed her embezzlement. So she seduced the man she'd set up to seduce you. You're insane, Becca said, but she was still backing away. Actually, I'm just thorough. I have recordings of our conversation yesterday, Becca. I have documentation of your affair with Nate. I have evidence of you passing confidential information to environmental groups. I let that sink in. And as of about an hour ago, your husband Richard has all of it too. Becca's face went white. That's right. Richard knows everything. About the affair, about the manipulation, about how you've been lying to everyone for over a year. He's filing for divorce tomorrow morning, and he's also turning over evidence of your corporate espionage activities to the district attorney. This is impossible, Nate said, but he was looking around like he expected police to come pouring out of the empty stores. What's impossible is that you thought you could get away with it, I replied. All of you. Julia, you thought you could lie and cheat and steal money from our joint accounts without consequences. Nate, you thought you could break environmental laws and falsify government reports without getting caught. And Becca, you thought you could manipulate everyone around you like chess pieces without anyone figuring out your game. I stepped out of the Radio Shack then, walking toward them across the empty mall corridor. They all turned to face me, and I saw something I'd never seen before in any of their faces. Genuine fear. But here's the thing about consequences, I continued, no longer needing the PA system. They don't care about your plans or your justifications or your hurt feelings. They just are. Tom, Julia said, and her voice was smaller than I'd heard it in years. What happens now? I looked at my wife of 22 years, the woman who'd shared my bed and raised my daughter and promised to love me in sickness and in health. The woman who'd thrown all of that away for a man she'd never have met if her best friend hadn't been plotting revenge. Now you face the consequences of your choices, I said simply. All of you. I turned and walked back toward the mall entrance, leaving the three of them standing in that empty corridor with the wreckage of their schemes scattered around them like debris from an explosion. Behind me, I heard voices rising, accusations, denials, the sound of relationships imploding in real time. But I didn't look back. I'd said everything that needed to be said. As I reached my truck in the parking lot, my phone buzzed with a text from Ella. Dad, I heard about the criminal charges against Mom's boyfriend. Are you okay? I typed back up, I'm perfect, sweetheart. Everything is exactly as it should be. And for the first time in over a year, that was completely true. The game was over, and I'd won in ways I'd never expected. Not because I'd destroyed my enemies, but because I'd finally stopped being small. I'd stopped accepting other people's versions of who I was supposed to be and started being who I actually was. Someone who didn't back down from a fight, someone who played to win, someone who understood that the best revenge wasn't getting even. It was being better. As I drove away from the abandoned mall, I could see Julia, Nate, and Becca in my rearview mirror, still standing under the flickering parking lot lights, finally understanding what it meant to face the consequences of thinking they were smarter than everyone else. Funny thing about consequences, they're the only things that finish what they start.